Hello, everyone. Welcome to Psychology and Spirituality, a Bridge to a Better Life discussion. During our weekly episodes, we explore this intersection of spirituality and psychology, and as a result, we are able to capture timeless wisdom contained in both disciplines. I'd like to welcome all of you who joined us today and invite you to this space where inner truth can meet our daily lives. I'm your host, Marcia Trajano, and with me is Yuri Castro, who is again joining us in this exploration of many amazing wisdoms, pearls of wisdom, right, Yuri? But today I want to invite him to get into a very interesting, different, and interesting exploration, which is to lead into reflections of this profound journey, the journey that is really not across time, not across space, but a journey inward toward the self, or really the conquest of the self, which is a topic inspired by the wisdom of spiritual author Joanna De Angelis. Yuri, as I was reflecting on the topic, I just kept coming up with several questions that I hope you can address with me today. So, for example, have you ever felt or actually know someone that felt as if they're repeating the same emotional patterns time over time? Or have you ever wondered why, in some other case, completely different questions, but somehow we have all that external, outward success, or even inward spiritual practices, but it just feels like peace evades us. Peace is just out of reach, that horizon that we try to get it and it's not there. What if the key, Yuri, is not really in external values, right? But the key is contained deeply buried within us in the layers, perhaps, of our psyche, in the maybe unhealed parts of our history, and in the shadow that we have all somehow culturally, educationally, or whatever, right? We've been taught to fear. So, shall we begin today's episode by breaking down some of the questions so we can bring clarity and compassion to our fears and inner truths? What do you think?
Absolutely. First and foremost, hello everyone, whoever and whenever you're watching this or listening to this. I think those are some very interesting ideas for us to talk about here. As you're talking, I ended up thinking about how Joanna De Angelis, whom you already mentioned,
Mhm.
she often says during her works that the essential objective of earthly existence, meaning the existence here on earth in this specific state of our evolution, is to
Yeah,
know ourselves. So the person's objective, the essential objective, is to know oneself. And as you
yeah.
mentioned, I think very well, Marcia, a lot of the times we don't find peace, or we don't find a little bit of happiness, which is, we know it's still impossible, and it's all of with all of its what it encompasses to
Uh-huh.
have right now in this existence. But we don't find that peace because we're running away from things. We are running away from the daunting task and the daunting challenge of
Mhm.
looking inward, of knowing ourselves.
I love what you're saying, right? So we somehow, and our ego is actually a master in that, to create those escape mechanism, right? And as a result, we end up running away from ourselves, right? That's what you call the
Absolutely.
daunting task, to know ourselves. And I always think, Yuri, that to do that, to confront ourselves actually in a very peaceful manner, requires, above all, courage, but also compassion. right?
Compassion towards ourselves, compassion towards the
Mm-hmm.
state that we're in, compassion towards others, because others are also in a state of where of development of their own selves as well. So, and I think you mentioned something interesting also in the beginning, this
Mm-hmm.
idea that if we've run away from incorporating the shadow, from understanding the shadow, then we
Mm-hmm.
find ourselves in what, Joanna also talks about, this state of
Mm-hmm.
uh like the conscience that is asleep. So it's
Yes.
something that becomes almost like a cycle, as you're alluding to in the beginning, of this,
Yeah.
sleep consciousness that goes into this cycle of just doing the organic needs. So,
Yeah.
eating, sleeping, having sex, and then rinse and repeat. So it
Yeah.
goes on this cycle, and what we find is that the person that's going on this cycle, only paying attention to the organic needs and not really trying to find psychological, spiritual meaning, what ends up happening is they become unhappy. It's because they're
Yeah.
running away from that task. Would you agree?
Yes, it's like something's missing. There's that the gap, the void. I don't know, but I'm doing it all, right?
Absolutely.
On many ways. As you know, we have become such a distracted society, a human race that is so distracted, and anything distracts us, from TV to radio to magazines. This is, I'm dating myself, but perhaps 50 years ago, those were at some point called the evils of brainwashing one, right? And boom, put us today where we are. And those are easy to deal with, because right now, and I'm looking and I don't have it with me, interesting enough, but the so-called mobile devices, that it's almost attached to our hands wherever we go, and it's there. And even the expectation that people have, that if they ping you, if you will, with some funny commentary, etc., there's the expectation that you will immediately respond, and or how we're always responding to stimuli from the beautiful people. If we think about it, right, the curated, the edited, the best, superficially speaking, at least the best of the best, according to some sort of beauty criteria, or the criteria of what is success, all the status symbols, and we become consumers of it all, and we become more and more distracted. So instead of spending the time doing what we need to do, we look everywhere else. It's the perfect storm. Technology has mastered those external types of stimuli, right? It mastered social media, among many other channels or ways of distraction exist, and they are better and better capturing us. And the more we do it, the farther away we are from ourselves. But
Yeah.
back to Joanna, because I think you mentioned some things that are quite interesting, and I believe, Yuri, that Jonah DeAndrews really shed light in the subject, right, that we're talking about, which is the journey inward. And she talks a lot using this term, the conquest of the self.
Yes.
I like it more of the, instead of the conquest of the self, calling perhaps that the inner transformation, that inner journey, the self discovery. But anyways, but she says that this inward journey is not only possible, despite the fact that we said it requires courage and compassion. She, Jonah the angel, says it is essential. I think you use the word essential, right? Essential
Yes.
for healing, for happiness, for a sense of integrity. But I wanted to ask you, Yuri, why are we even talking about the self? Why is it even important? Can we talk maybe embedded in this idea of the importance of talking about ourselves with the concept, perhaps, or the question, perhaps, about who is really living our lives. This is a little philosophical, if I may, right? Yuri, is it our conscious self or our conditioned instincts, right? More of the primitive mind, which you said it so well, that almost animal-like type of instincts to survive, which really is more in the realm of eating, sleeping, seeking shelter, reproducing, repeat, right? What do you think? Who's in control?
I think if we look back to as we were evolving as spirits, and we still are
Hmm.
evolving, the more we evolve, the more the spirit overcomes the matter in a way, has more control over the matter, and the psychology goes with that as well. The more
Hmm.
primitive we were, the less psychologically aware we were, the less psychologically knowledgeable we were, and we will still be way more knowledgeable, way more aware, way more in control, because you
Yeah.
use this word and I like it. We will be way more in control of our own realities as this process moves along in the evolutionary, let's call it ladder, the
Yeah.
evolutionary
Like,
staircase that
yeah.
we all have. So before, when as the more primitive we are, the more we have what Joanna, again, the terminology she uses as sleep consciousness, to then it transitions to this sort of semi-asleep
Hmm.
consciousness where there's a higher level of awakening of the own conscious mind. And when we're talking about the self, we're talking about the plenitude of the
Hmm.
spirit, or the self with
Hmm.
capital S. And we're
Yeah.
talking about all the integration of all these things, and which is in the end the purpose of our own evolution as spirits, to reach this state of plenitude. So
Yeah.
right now we're still very much bound to these primary automatisms, or this, these automatic processes, because
Robotic almost, right? It's just
yes,
it's such a we are put into automatic or autopilot that we forget to be in the moment, right?
yes, and we become also very reactionary. If we think about it, that's
Hmm.
also part of it. The more
Hmm.
control we're going to gain over those processes, those psychological and, of course, spiritual processes, the more the less we're going to be reactionary, in the sense of just acting based on impulse, based on instinct. And we're going to be acting way more than reacting, based on higher sentiments, such as, love, of all the virtues of patience, charity, tolerance. And that is the end goal, but we reach there once we
Uh,
start to look inward, once we start to find the meaning, the
mhm.
essential meaning of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah, so I love where you're going, and it's almost like can we rewind and talk more about this idea about reaction versus action, meaning if we start to really think about it, Yuri, that reactionary, if you will, life is one that is of a passive state and only reacts against an
Yes.
external, against stimuli, right? External stimulus in this case, and then I'll do something, I'll feel something, I will behave in this way. Whereas the actionary or acting, as you mentioned, may be one that is intentional. I'm here. I don't have to wait for things to happen to me, but I happen to myself and I happen to things. Does this make sense? Even the
It
language
does.
makes sense? Okay.
Yes, and I'm also thinking, if we can
Mm,
take a step further, it's not only the reactionary from from the standpoint of uh,
mm,
behavioral, but we can also think in the sense of the higher sentiments. The reactionary part of
yeah.
ourselves is still very much in play, because we
Mhm.
often think, okay, I'm only going to forgive this person if they ask for forgiveness. I'm only going to forgive if they forgive first. I'm only going to say I'm sorry
Yes.
if they say first. What is that if not a reaction? We're waiting for someone to do something in order for us to then do it.
Yeah. And we can even pause, perhaps, to think about what you said, right? Because even you're talking the higher sentiments, right? The feelings, pure feelings that we are all in the essence of our humanity as immortal spirits that we have. But when we also start to think, yeah, feelings, but in between a reactionary behavior and that higher feelings, higher sentiments, there is also this thing called emotions. And in the emotional landscape, a lot of it, that emotional response, can be still reactionary, right? I am reacting to something that I feel is an act of violence, therefore I react with anger, right? Or with the same act of violence, I act with fear, right? So those are
Uh-huh.
still reactionary to something outside of me. And it's very interesting when we start to think, what about you, Yuri? What about you, Marcia? What about all of us who are here today? What is it that is coming from within, which is quite frankly, we say S with a capital S. And since we're referencing Joanna so much today, uh, Joanna explains that when in her body of work, in her psychological series of books, she always references the self with capital S equals the immortal soul, the
Yes.
spirit that you already mentioned, right? The spirit that is immortal, the spirit that lives through many, well, we can say many lives, but it's really one life, but many corporeal existence upon physical birth and physical death, right? But that self is the conductor, the mothership, if you will, that conducts us for this goals of happiness, of really um, having that greatest achievement, which is a paradox of it all, right? If you think about it, our greatest achievement is to become truly ourselves, which we're already there.
Ourselves with
So,
capital S. Yes.
yes, yes. So I just find it quite interesting. And often, and we can talk about our friend, right? A quote unquote friend or ourselves. I'm just kidding here, Yuri. But we can think of ourselves and maybe just pause to ask, when was the last time we sat still? Even, just the notion of stillness is becoming more and more foreign to all of us, right? When was the last time we sat still? And we could do things like we could drink a cup of tea, a cup of water. We can just sit still and look inward.
Absolutely. That's an excellent question, especially as you were referring to before, in this very
Hmm.
chaotic and hectic
Hmm.
world that everything tries to grab our attention. Everything is geared and made and created and tuned to get our attention, to
Yeah.
drive us away from looking at ourselves, to like pondering, to meditating, to thinking, to just being quiet. Even
Hmm.
silence has become very, very rare.
Yeah. Yeah. There is, I just remember, I think it was Isaac Asimov. I think many years ago, I was still a teenager. There was a book, and I just still remember where he talked about the idea of the human brain. Of course, at the time was the future, uh, could not deal with silence. Therefore, it, noise, but noise in terms of either talk, right, or music is omnipresent. And quite frankly, isn't it? Right? I just think about, let's say, going to the airport, especially. I'm old here, so I embrace my age. But when we go to airports, and everybody has a headset, and if you go to on a train, or if you go on public space, could be drinking coffee if you're alone, or even if you're not alone, but that thing of, inputs into a year, it's present everywhere you go. Therefore, being faced, being in a situation that we're having to face silence can be quite daunting. And I wonder if there's any symbolism to it. I don't know if you've thought about it, but the symbolism of silence perhaps equals isolation or loneliness, states of mind that are actually, culturally speaking, not um, accepted anymore, right? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Because the idea, yeah, I think the idea of silence is very rare because our
Mm-hmm.
brains are getting trained to
Mm-hmm.
always be paying attention to something, and that something is not silence. That
Mm-hmm.
something is not nothing. It's
Mm-hmm.
something. It's not nothing. So we're always jumping from one thing to the other. Nowadays, we have
Mm-hmm.
these mobile devices, as you mentioned, which are
Yeah.
personalized worlds.
Yeah.
That's what they are, because they're personalized to each person, and they're very
Yeah.
affordable nowadays for the most part. So it's this epidemic of, like you said, people with the headphones, and like everything is trying to grab our attention, and we're just getting used to it. It's becoming the
Yeah.
norm now, because a lot of the times when there's silence in the conversation, when there's silence, even staying home in silence
Yeah.
becomes something, that people shy away from, or they try to avoid, because oftentimes too, being in silence is the answer to a lot of our problems, as we learned with Joanna and with so many
Yeah.
other authors. As we can
Yeah.
sort of connect with God, we can connect with the higher spirits, we can connect with ourselves. This is again a
Mm-hmm.
conversation about looking inward. And if I'm very anxious, if I don't like what I'm gonna what I- what with if I don't like what I see there, I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna try to stay away from moments where I'm going to be forced to be literally with myself.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting to think about it, right? This silence that, I don't know. I'm going to reference something that, again, was a long time ago, so I don't know the reference to provide here. But the idea that the brain abhors void or the vacuum. I don't know if you studied or if you encounter that. So from that perspective, and this is juxtaposing to the conversation we have about silence and connecting to the sacred, to divine within, right? But cognitively speaking, and from a neuroscientific findings, is that the brain itself abhors it just it's terrified about anything that has emptiness. Therefore, we, whenever in the absence of a narrative, we um, create those narratives ourselves. So it's very interesting when we hear about the my truth, your truth, and the real truth, because between one event, my brain creates a narrative of the things that I don't know, and you too. Therefore, it becomes a multifaceted view of the world, a multifaceted view of events. And of course, as we spoke earlier, in this reactionary propensity to to life, then we now start to have just emotional response to a reality that we create, a myth perhaps, or a fable instead of reality. I just thought it's interesting how
Yes,
all of it connects, right?
and you're mentioning the brain abhorring these things. Also,
Mm,
it's closely related to that is this idea that we can't be bored anymore. Boredom has become something almost extinct, or we're trying to
mm,
make it extinct. So we see not only adults but also children. Look at how technology is affecting children
mm,
nowadays, where
mm,
they don't know how to be bored anymore, and if they're bored, there's something that's going to be given in their hands, or something that the adults are going to do to
Yeah.
help them get away from the boredom. And then they grow up, they don't
Yeah.
know how to be bored, so their brains are always seeking constant stimulation. But
Yeah.
going back to Joanna, like in linking with this
Mhm.
idea, we're talking about silence, we're talking about ignoring, like to look inward, to look at
Yeah.
ourselves, to see what we still
Mhm.
need to improve and what we can still improve. She
Mhm.
mentioned something very, very powerful, I think, where in the book In the Search of Truth, where she talks
Mhm.
about how those who ignore themselves, or those who, let's say they try to get away from looking inward, they
Yeah.
walk around with insecurity and emotionally ill. So she's
Yeah.
talking about emotionally ill. And one of the things that happens from this is they put blames onto others. They're trying to find external
Mhm.
solutions. That's what they're trying to find, external
And
solutions. So
and it's
everything is
almost
on
like
the outside.
sorry to interrupt you, but it's almost like outsourcing the pain, right? I
It is.
cannot be responsible or even curious about looking for the root cause of this pain. So it's easier to look elsewhere, right?
And if I don't find anybody else to outsource it to,
Uh,
one of the resources is then to numb it, to distract
yeah.
myself from the pain, from looking at that part of myself that I know
Mhm.
that I need to change, that I have deep in my conscience this
Yeah.
notion that this is a barrier I will have to overcome. I'm going to have to work on this part of
Mhm.
myself. That's why she says that those who know themselves, and we're going back to, to
Mhm.
Delphos and Socrates
Yeah.
and know thyself, which
Love it. Yeah.
which is something, that perpetuated through millennia now, that she
Yeah.
says that those who know themselves, they're possessors of wisdom, and they're, one step away from self-illumination. I think that's
Yeah.
what she says. So, and this is very powerful if we think
It
about it.
is. It is. It is. So back to the question, uh, why is it so hard to put ourselves in that position to follow Socrates, as Socrates mentioned to us, right? We must know ourselves, but why is it so hard, and who's truly in charge? Who's in charge, Yuri? What can we say? Who's in charge? Is it the machine or not? And I may, if I put a little squirrel squirrel moment here, um, when we go back to the push and pull, right? This um, uh, i- almost like this architecture of how our societies are creating so many inputs, right? So there's this idea of distracted world because there's so many sources for stimulus for our brain. But if we go back a little bit, like go a step, a couple of steps from this discussion, Yuri, it is also very connected to the type of society that we live on. And what am I talking about? We're talking about, you and I both live in the US, so it's a individualistic society. It is a capitalist society, which means a production society. But we don't produce, as in manufacturing, as much as we produce inputs or tidbits in the service reality. So you are someone who provides a service, right? I am the same, different fields, but we provide a service, and the service that we create or we provide in this production type of society requires my brain now to pay attention, to do something with that information. The problem that we have, if we go back now, no longer 30 years, but perhaps 50 years from now, 50 years earlier, or even 100 years earlier, when this society, the US, or many other societies were mostly, say, still agrarian. Work was in that, you know, sun up, sundown, you got up and you worked, right?
Yeah.
At sundown, wash your hands and you kind of rest for the until the next day. Today, that's not the same. We wake up, and the first thing we do is we get that amazing little thing called a mobile device. And even though we're not producing anything, we're equally engaged as if we were, right?
Yes.
So that the brain always connected works as if we are working all the time. So instead of say 8 hours work, we're now working
Way more.
20 hours a day many times. And our children, and we're talking about as early as elementary age children, because they have access to mobile devices at that age,
Mm-hmm.
they're also working, their brains are working. Therefore, and I'm just thinking out loud here, Yuri, um, it's almost like we're becoming a society of burned out individuals. We're
Oh,
so
yes.
overstimulated that there's nothing else out there.
There's nothing else out there, and also there's the search for more and more and more, but there's a ceiling. There's the
Mm-hmm.
limit. Our bodies have limits, you know. And
Hmm.
oftentimes, like I said, that's why I mentioned that we try to numb it, or we try to find distractions, and what doesn't distract me anymore, I'm going to try to find something else. And it's always jumping from one thing to the other with this lingering feeling of dissatisfaction with the reality. That's
Yeah.
something that I think is very important for us to realize. And when we're talking about knowing ourselves, which is
Hmm.
one of the greatest challenges perhaps of us, especially in this day and age where we're
Hmm.
we're so moved away from silence, from having quiet time, from having things that we can really look inward and
Hmm.
reflect and try to change. One of
Hmm.
these challenges, and we talked about already, is the shadow. This idea, now bringing a little bit more to the
Hmm.
psychological aspect here. This
Sure.
the
Hmm.
shadow, like this denied and unknown part of the personality, which
Hmm.
is everything that we denying ourselves, but that remains active unconsciously. Everything that
Hmm.
we do not accept, but that our nature insists
Hmm.
in revealing and bringing to the surface. Those things, the shadow, which, as Joanna also talks about so much, this idea that our challenge is to
Yeah.
not defeat it, but instead integrate it consciously and harmoniously.
Yeah, and when we talk about the shadow in general, and the need, the idea that we really should integrate, right, or individuate, to use a Jungian term,
Yes. Hmm.
right? I think we should all agree that that sense of self conquest, if you will, that really reaching or achieving what we need to do does not mean that we should erase who we are, right? It's the quite the
Uh-huh.
opposite. It is looking in with courage and compassion, but acknowledging the whole of we are, and of course, this who we are, it's still fragmented, right? It's a dual type of reference where we look at things always in I am not, right?
Hmm.
But when we start to looking at the end game, if you will, is that the integrity, that individuation, the whole of all of our parts, it would include all of our fears. I can imagine all of the things that we perhaps are, you mentioned denied aspects of ourselves, but I'm even thinking the aspects of ourselves that we failed. And oh my goodness, we are ashamed of, right? Or even the unresolved traumas,
Uh-huh.
all of it,
Conflicts, yeah.
right? And the ugly side of you and me, right? The ugly side that is no longer, that is very far from that public persona that we cultivate so well.
But we also learn, which is ties very well with this, that the law of progress is unstoppable, is immutable.
Yeah.
It happens. So the idea is, the self. When when you're talking about the conflicts, the traumas, these things, Joanna talks about how the self develops through
Hmm.
these she called existential efforts. And I thought that was
Yeah.
so interesting, the
Yeah.
terminology, existential efforts that help awake the dormant treasures, because otherwise we just go through this process of
Hmm.
hibernation, where the awakening usually comes, she says, in the form of something something
Hmm.
painful. There is a
Yeah.
painful phenomena that shakes the person up and sort of like propels them forward, when they
Hmm.
have been trying just in the state of hibernation, in the state of denial, in the state of everything that is not really progressing in the with the pace that the individual can progress.
Hmm. And can you, for our audience, can you tell us what is behind this idea of the law of progress, Yuri, if you don't mind?
So the idea behind the law of progress, this is drawing from teachings from Spiritism. So we're talking
Hmm.
Allan Kardec, we're talking of all others. This
Hmm.
idea that basically, in the very simple terms, that the spirit is made, the spirit, the immortal part of ourselves, which is
Hmm.
definitely not our bodies, our souls, our
Hmm.
spirits, they are made for plenitude. They are made to progress. They have been progressing, and they will continue to progress. And when we try to stop progress, we are propelled forward, because we cannot stop progress. Even by making mistakes, we are
Hmm.
learning things about ourselves. We're going through a process of reparation of those mistakes.
Hmm.
And that in itself is a learning process for the soul, which is progress.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
And
Um,
and it's
mhm.
important too, Marcia, if I may
Yeah,
just add one
sure.
thing here too, with the process and the progress, and this idea of developing, like through the self through existential efforts. This
Mhm.
idea that the journey is not easy. The journey is definitely not easy, but
Yeah,
we don't reach the top of the mountain without having to put some effort to reach there.
I,
Nobody is
yeah.
teleported there. Nobody's got a helicopter, sitting in a chair just very comfortably. No, we have to. Anybody who reaches anything, like in life, and we're talking just very narrowly about this life, or any spirit that we see that has walked this world, that is very enlightened, is
Yeah,
somebody who has gone through tremendous sacrifice. There isn't
yeah.
one elevated spirit that has passed through this life, through our no our the earth, our very brief history here on this planet, that
Mhm.
has not gone through sacrifice to reach the top.
I love it. And the thoughts that come to my mind are, we, if we're really honest, we're not just dealing with, oh, all of our pain points in life, oh, traffic, bills to pay, deadlines to meet, right? We're talking about the Olympian effort to do something
Uh-huh.
like we've never done before, and gain the gold medal for being the best and breaking all the records, etc. But that dealing with the shadow really means looking at those past behaviors and patterns, emotional reactions, behavioral patterns, our fears. And I would even imagine all of those wounds, like we talked about the wounded inner child that
Mm-hmm.
comes back, and we have to look at it again with compassion, and understand that it's okay, right? And those shadow aspects of ourselves are not they do not make us monsters, right?
No, no.
It's really that authenticity, that vulnerability, that the truth about who we are that invites us to love us infinitely. in all of the good, the bad, and the ugly, all of its nuances, and still to develop as much
Yes,
as. Mhm.
it's part of us.
Yeah,
And it's part of
yeah,
what makes us unique, each person, each soul, in their
mhm,
very individual, in the sense of being very unique progress that they've had so far. It
mhm.
shows us, it's almost like it's a trail that we leave behind, but it's always coming with us. That's why
Yeah,
it's called the shadow, which is interesting
yeah,
because the shadow is always with
yeah,
us from a, you know, a physical standpoint. Even if we think about any projection of light, we're gonna have. I think of Peter Pan when he was trying to
yeah,
find his shadow, right? Sort of like
yeah.
always,
That's
it's always
right.
right.
Yeah.
It's always following. It's always
Mhm.
following us, and this idea then that it is what makes us unique. It's what makes us
Yeah,
who we are and how we got here. So we're
yeah,
what you're talking about makes sense when we look at it from the standpoint of let me see
yeah,
what I still need to integrate, what I still need
yeah,
to understand, because something that may be, let's say, offensive to me may not be to you. So
yeah.
okay, so that
Exactly.
means that I have some things that I need to work on that maybe
Yeah,
you already don't, and vice
yeah.
versa.
I would say in a very silly, if you will, type of metaphor. It's like, let's say, um, I look at myself today and say, ooh, right? I got some funds, additional budget. I'm going to undergo some slight change to my house. And I start to look in the ceiling. I said, I want to get, let's say, a new ceiling fan. I'm just being real silly here, Yuri. And when I go to add the ceiling, I see some sign that there is some weird coloring. And I said, well, I can just cover it up, hide it, that's a
Yeah,
shadow, or I can look it further, and I look it further, and I find that the insulation with the roof is gone, right?
there's
There's an animal
infiltration.
there, yeah. And now I go look further, and there's infiltration, and now I need to look at the roof, etc. Right? So I think that the metaphor may be we can approach life with curiosity, and or we can approach life with the that escape mechanism and try to ignore and hide. But if we approach life with curiosity, we can say, could that, whatever is wrong, right, the change in colors in my ceiling behind the old ceiling fan, could that be or hold a message that will lead to fixing it, or in our case, to healing? And I want to just, before we close, because we're approaching to the end of our time, Yuri, how do we grow? How do we even begin for all of us who are interested in this discussion today? How do I even begin to, to get to this inner sense of achievement, of conquest? What are your thoughts? Or can you give any tips to everyone here?
Yeah, I think you already mentioned a very key word. Actually, two. You said courage and compassion, the two C's, and I
Okay.
agree with that 100%. Courage,
Mhm.
compassion, and from a more process-oriented type of answer, I would say understanding the role of acceptance, because this is
Mm.
the same analogy used with the roof. If
Yeah,
you just ignore it, if you don't accept, well, I do have an issue, I do have a problem with my roof, I need to fix it, the ceiling, etc. If you don't
yeah,
accept that, you're not gonna get a repair for it. So the idea
yeah.
of acceptance, and to quote Carl Rogers, another big name of psychology, he said that we cannot change until we thoroughly accept what we are.
I
And I
love
think
it.
that's one big tip, or one big, comment that I want to leave with, this idea that along with the courage and the compassion, which are almost like
Mhm.
ingredients necessary for this mix,
Yeah,
acceptance is like, in a way, it's like having the recipe and following the recipe, because if we don't accept
yeah,
that, we're not going to be able to really
yeah,
change and
yeah.
improve.
And I even say with acceptance, the other word that comes to my mind here is the sense I mentioned curiosity, but it's really awareness, right? looking at whatever comes to you, to me, to you, Yuri, to all of us here present today, but not rejecting what comes to us, but actually responding to it,
Yes.
seeking
Paying
awareness.
attention to it.
Yes, clarity, right? And if it causes pain, just be curious and try to understand why is it causing pain, right? So maybe I would say this is me trying to bring to everyone some and you correct me if I'm going someplace that is not good, Yuri. But maybe this is an invitation for all of us to start our days welcoming silence. So let's pledge to ourselves that I'm going to spend 5 minutes in silence. That's all, not more than 5 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe another aspect of this journey inward could be start writing down or journaling what we are feeling without judgment, of course. Just plain jot down, today I'm depressed, today I'm anxious, today I'm angry, today I am giddy with joy, whatever, right? And then ask ourselves, am I reacting, right? And if so, am I reacting with fear, right? With whatever is the emotional response, or am I seeking the truth, my truth? I don't know. Can we wrap it up with some final thoughts from you, Yuri, on this subject?
Absolutely. I think as a more general thought, sort of just understanding, this idea of the self, of knowing ourselves with capital S, even
Yeah,
understanding that human existence is going to be painful, it's going to be full of challenges and barriers, and that's
mm,
why it's so important for us to live it within a framework of moral and spiritual duties, with
yeah,
these lens that truly amplify the way we see things. Otherwise we're going to be succumbing to the automatic behaviors, the automatic actions, and the reactive sides of ourselves.
yeah. No more autopilot for all of us,
No.
right? That's awesome. But we are at time, and as we come to the closing seconds of our episode, I just hope all of us leave today with more than just ideas. We hope that you too, because I certainly am, can leave with a sense of possibility, right? Because this journey within, the journey of self conquest, it's absolutely not about perfection, right? It's also not on the other spectrum, not about
Hmm.
isolation or even numbing or avoiding all those life's challenges that come to us. I would say it's about engaging all of it, life in all of its nuances with consciousness. And it's about also maybe understanding those conflicts, as Yuri put, including every wound that we may have, or even every mistake that we may have fell prey to. They're all part of a sacred process of becoming. So, Yuri, you and I and everybody in between, we are not broken.
Nope.
We we are just becoming what is our promised land, right? We're becoming what we already have the promise of being, which is the divine within. And let's not forget, our shadow isn't our enemy, but it's that invitation to step into the light of who we really are meant to be, that individuated, that numinous self. So, as we explored all those ideas about the conquest of the self, right? My final thought is that we are actually confronted, Yuri, with the notion that this is a task that is for saints and for sinners, right? For all of us. And it is a call to all of us, this call to pause, to reflect, and beautifully, maybe, meet ourselves fully and honestly. So let's be gentle, let's be compassionate, let's be loving with ourselves. Let's be curious. Let's keep asking those deeper questions. And most of all, let's all know that, as Yuri mentioned, growth is not only needed, but we can even say, right, Yuri, it's contagious because when we awaken the self,
Yes.
we also help to awaken the world. So I love the concept. So I want to say thank you, Yuri, for being here. Thank you, all of you who came to join us in this discussion and reflections, right? And if this is the first time that you actually are here with us listening to a program, please note that these podcasts is a Psychology and Spirituality weekly talks are based on the works by Jonah DeAngelis, and we hope that you're able to consider them and expand your own thoughts around the topic. Thank you so much, Yuri. Thank you, all of our sponsors, Mansão do Caminho, the United States Spirits Federation, the International Spiritist Council, and AMI Brazil, the Brazilian arm of the Medical Spiritist Association. We'll be back next week with another episode. So long, Yuri. So long, everyone.
Bye bye, everyone. Thank you.